In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can paint a texture and set up a material for something that we could use for like a skull or bone or maybe some teeth that are around this necklace thing here. So in my file, I've already got set up here. If we take a look in the subtools, I've got my current subtools selected within this stack here, and I don't want to look at everything else, so I can go ahead and do this solo button. So I can turn everything else off except for just looking at this skull. I'll tap F to frame this again. So I tapped F, and I'll just kind of zoom out a little bit. The next thing I'm going to do is go into the texture palette, and I'm going to load up Spotlight. We've looked at that in another video, but we'll go over that again real quick. So I'll go to Texture, and I want to go ahead and import in some of the different textures I want to use for these different bones. So I'm going to navigate to where those textures sit. I've got a folder called Textures, and then inside of that I've got Skull Bones folder within there. So I can go ahead and click all the different images that I want to load. So I can click this first one, hold down Shift, and then add to that selection. I'll just go ahead and hit open, and it's going to add all these different textures to ZBrush. I'm going to go ahead and take the texture palette, click and drag it over to the right, and dock it over here to the right. So once I have all these textures loaded, I can go ahead and select these different textures here, and I want to add them basically to Spotlight. So I can click this one here, say add to Spotlight, keep going down here, and keep adding these different textures to Spotlight. I want to make sure I didn't have that one already loaded, so I'll just keep going down here, keep loading like that. I think I've almost got them all. Okay, so once they're loaded in Spotlight, I can click and drag this thing around here. We did look at an earlier video how we can kind of tile these things together. So there's this tile unified, so it's going to actually give you a unified tile over there. We can do tile proportionally, so it tries to keep the proportions of the images on there. But basically this is going to give us a stack of reference that we can pull from. So I can click anywhere in the open viewport and click and drag this thing around. I could, if I don't select one of these images, I can scale everything down and maybe just push it off to the side a little bit. So maybe I want my reference images to kind of sit over here like this. If there's one particular image that I really want to use, I can click on that and drag it over, and I could scale that thing up. So I could have it roughly about the right size of this here. Okay. And I'll just push it off to the side just a little bit here. And to get rid of this manipulator, I can tap Z, and that'll leave my images up. And if I want to turn off the images or turn off Spotlight, I can hit Shift Z, and that's going to hide everything. Shift Z brings it back, and then just Z alone brings back the manipulator for this. So we've already looked at in the video that if we want to pull colors from any of the Spotlight information, we have to have this manipulator up that kind of controls all this stuff by tapping Z. And when that manipulator's up, we're able to drag from the color picker and then drag out and then pick a color at that point. So now that I have that color set, I might want to switch color and then maybe get a secondary color, so I can drag out. Maybe I want to get a darker kind of brownish color at that point. And then now that I'm done with this manipulator, what I could do is push all those other images off to the side and maybe just move this guy over here a little bit, and then tap Z. And then I'm kind of done right now with using the Spotlight. I just want to have it sitting there as reference. So the next part is we want to set things up with our standard brush. We can use that. I'm just going to turn RGB on to make sure we're painting, and turn Z add and make sure that's off, so I'm only painting with color at that point. And if I'm clicking and drawing on here, you might want to check, make sure you don't have any textures on. So we'll drag down here to textures, don't have any textures on, and this colorize is on. For some reason, I think I've filled this with a gray in a previous session, so it's not really liking that. So what I can do is just fill the entire object. I'm going to switch color because I want to fill it with this one. We can go to color and say fill object. And now at that point, it should fill the entire object with whatever color it is that you have selected. And if I hit switch color, when I paint, I should be painting now with that color. I think I know what's happening here. So basically, because the spotlight image is up, it wants us to paint some color with that image. So if I put this over the top here and I kind of draw on here, it's going to pick up those colors from this. So this isn't going to be the best setup for me if I want to have reference and just take a look at reference. But I can use this to start pulling colors from. Now if I want to tap Shift Z, then at that point I should be able to paint with whatever color I want at that point. It just seems that whenever Spotlight's up, it expects that you're going to actually be painting with those different colors. So I can just with these two different colors kind of rough out maybe a darker area for the eyes and for the nose here. And maybe I'll do a little bit of shading on the sides here. Take down my brush size and start drawing some darker values with inside here. So we've already looked at how we can do some auto masking as well. So we could get some of the shading going, and then at that point we can go into our brush settings, and I'll dock this off to the right over here, and there's auto masking, and we can do cavity masking. So if I just take a look at what the default is going to give me here, with the cavity mask positive, it's going to paint on the outside, but if I want to paint the cavities, I can drag this to a negative value, and you can see now I'm going to start painting, and it's going to start filling in these cracks. Another thing I like to do is after we've drawn these cracks in here, they can be a little pixelated at times. So to kind of combat that, I hold down Shift, and for some reason I have a texture turned on when I'm holding up the Shift modifier, so I can just go ahead and turn that texture off. And then I don't want to sculpt anything as well with the Shift right now, so I can turn Z add off. So now at that point I can go ahead and hold down Shift, and I can kind of lightly tap on this, and you can see how it's going to kind of blur out the color for me at that point. And then I'm not sure what happened here, but we will just go ahead and do switch color, and I'll start painting some of this in. I'll actually turn this cavity mask off so I can get this. I might want to turn this back face mask on. That will keep it to where, you know, if I paint on the back side of this, none of that paint goes through on the other side. So that might be handy to have turned on. So go ahead and paint some of that up. I'll get those darker colors again and turn on this cavity mask and maybe hit some of the back of this a little bit more and some of these cracks in through here like that. And if I ever want to pull that reference back up, then I can just tap Shift Z and I can take a look at some of the reference again. I could even pull colors from this, so if I wanted to pull some kind of color from the teeth on here, then I'll pull out like this. Remember, you have to have that manipulator up at that point for this. So maybe I want to take some of that color for the teeth area and maybe start painting this a little bit lighter in through here, maybe at the tips of this. And then I could just kind of push this color up a little lighter if that's not bright enough for me. Like that. And then maybe I want a darker color than this for some of the cracks inside of here, so we can turn on that cavity mask again and I can kind of pull down a little bit on here. I don't really need to go too far with that. So I can paint these darker kind of cracks in through here at that point. Maybe I want a little more darkness in through here. And again, I can hold down Shift and I can kind of lightly tap on there to kind of smooth out some of these things if it's getting a little too pixelated at that point. And if I turn off this cavity mask, we can get something back like, you know, we're just kind of using an airbrush at that point. And we can kind of take down the RGB intensity and then build in some kind of artificial shading for this. Maybe we want to make it a little more dark at this point. So usually you don't want to build in too much shading with your model, because your shading is going to come from the model itself. But in these kind of cases where I've got this thing that looks a little more stylized, more cartoony, I think it's okay to build some of that shading in. It does give it kind of a cool look. Like that. And then I'm going to try my stroke type. I'm going to put it on drag rectangle and then take my alpha, and then we'll try these little dots here. That's basically where I got these little dot kind of patterns here. And then I can give it a lighter color. Take down my RGB intensity to like 10 or so. And then I can click and drag these out. Still not intense enough, so I'll drag that out. Keep pumping that up until I can kind of see this stuff a little better. And here's a good case where, like, if I wanted the color to match up exactly with what's going on sculpt wise, then I can turn on Z-Add for this, and you can see I can sculpt with the color and maybe drop the intensity of this down a little bit. So I'm actually getting those dots along with the color, and it produces a really cool look. I really do like the fact that you can actually sculpt and paint at the same time, but you know, while you're kind of getting used to how you should work, you might want to separate the two until you kind of get a handle on getting the control for how strong your sculpt should be in relation to how strong should your paint be. So I'll drag this back out and get a darker color, and maybe even pull some of these out. So the color is a lot stronger, but it seems like the intensity could be a little stronger now for the sculpt at this point. There's that. Maybe that's too intense for this area. Maybe that's a little too intense color-wise. I'll put this cavity mask back on and take the stroke and take off the alpha, because I want to get some darker kind of cracks in through here. So I need to turn this Z-Add off. And I'm starting to pull in a little more of this detail that I've actually already sculpted in this area. And then maybe now I'll take this cavity mask and go positive with it, and then I could take this lighter color, maybe even make it even more lighter, and push it towards more saturated over here. And then I could just kind of lightly paint in some highlight areas. It doesn't appear to be strong enough, so I can keep bumping that up. Might have to push it a little lighter. So you can see now it's starting to get quite a bit lighter. But it's almost like I don't necessarily want to paint in highlights, but it is almost like kind of painting in a little bit more light in certain areas, maybe on certain raised surfaces. So I might paint that a little bit more coming down to the center through here. Maybe hit the corner right there just a little bit, and I'll tap Shift Z to kind of bring this back and take a look at what we have. I was just trying to see if even the smooth would work with this up here, so it doesn't look like it will. If I tap Z, I can bring this back. So maybe I want to start trying to see if I can steal some stuff from this. So we can go and we can take a look at the spotlight radius, which I think this is up fairly high at this point, and then I want to find opacity and drop this down a little bit here like that, and I'll tap Z, and now you can see with this spotlight I can actually see maybe like what it is that I'm going to be painting on there before it actually applies strokes. So maybe I want to get some of these cracks on here. If I tap Z and bring this back, I can move this thing around, but it is possible for me to just kind of move my model around. So if I want to get a crack in through here, I can kind of position my model, and now I can kind of lightly paint some of this stuff on here, and maybe I'll make it go across the bridge of the nose. And I do have symmetry turned on, so I'll tap X and turn symmetry off, so then now I can kind of just paint that going across. If I hold down Shift, click, and then drag left and right, I can kind of spin my model. So again, hold down Shift, click and drag, and I can spin the model, because maybe I want to get a different angle. Just trying to see where I want to position that crack. That looks a bit large. So tap Z and then bring back up that the opacity, so I can see this thing better. Let's push this thing back off to the side. Maybe scale this. And move this image over here. Okay. Now I'll tap Z. If I want to see this thing at all times, then I'm going to have to tap Z and then click on this thing here. Then we're going to have to go to the spotlight radius and take that down to 0. Then at that point, there is no spotlight radius, and when I click Z, I can see this thing at all times at that point. I think I'm going to maybe add a little bit more darkness in certain areas, so I'm going to click and drag out and kind of get a sample of the color there, and then push that a little bit darker and maybe less saturated at that point. And I guess I can leave cavity mask on, and I'll just kind of paint in through here and see what that gives us. Forgetting about this, so Shift Z to turn that off, and then I can start painting again. I have a hard time remembering that that's the way that works for that. So let's keep building a little more darkness up and through here. Definitely want this dark and through here, because that's actually where this kind of rope thing kind of travels through. So I could turn off solo, and that's going to bring everything back that I've got. I would have to go at that point to my subtool stack and then turn everything off. So if I hold on Shift and click on this eye icon, I can turn everything off all at one time. Let me do that again, and then I could click on the visibility for the necklace string. So I could do the same thing for the string. If I want to start painting the string, I can click that, everything's turned off, and then I can click on the visibility of the skull, and now I can start working with that. So I think I want this like a darker kind of leather strap, so I might as well just go ahead and keep it this dark color that I got, and then go to color and say fill object, and you can see it's going to fill it with that. I do want it more brown, like that, and then maybe a darker color like that, and I'll go ahead and make sure on my brush, let me minimize the texture thing here so you can open and close these things by clicking on the name. So I'll go to brush, I've got cavity mask turned on, and I want it to paint darker in the cracks, so I'm going to have to drag this cavity mask down at that point. So I'm just going to kind of really quickly draw through this, maybe smooth some of that out. And turn this cavity mask off. And then I just might paint by hand some of these areas that I want a little bit darker. And then I want to get a lighter color for this, and let's do the cavity mask and go positive with it and see what that gets, if we can kind of hit some of these areas like that. So here we go with that. Texture, I could actually turn on any of these textures that I have. Let's see, I think this is a default texture that comes with ZBrush, this one and this one, so this kind of gives you some nice variation. If you look at the drag rectangle, we can click and drag this thing out like that, so that might be a bit strong, so I can take down the intensity of that and just kind of draw these things out a little bit more like that. So you can see it's giving us some kind of a little bit of a noise kind of pattern, which I think is good for this. And we might want to try this texture here too and see what that gets us. And then I can turn that off and put it back on freehand. And maybe I'll just draw with a darker color, make it kind of small. And maybe draw some, a little bit of like stripe kind of patterns. And if we want to draw these things by hand, then you might want to put the alpha on. There's an alpha right here. That's kind of got these like shaky lines, and then we could do the drag rectangle for that. Maybe turn up my RGB intensity at that point, and then we can click and drag out these kind of more straight lines, and maybe pump up the intensity. It's not dark enough quite yet. So this will let us just kind of drag these things out kind of quickly. So you can either paint this stuff by hand, or you can use a combination of like figuring out different alphas that you might want to use to control the shape. Like that. And let me go ahead and click on the head here real quick. Let me just see if I drag a few of these out. So I can do that. I can just drop down the intensity to where it's pretty low, and this will give me just some extra little line work. I don't want to go too crazy with it, but it kind of can break up some of these shapes a little bit and just give a little more detail. Same thing for this here. So let's drag down a little bit. And I want to blur this stuff just a little bit here. This is kind of strong. Maybe here too as well. So that's starting to look pretty neat. So I'm going to go back up to my body. I want to start checking this out with some of the other pieces. So I'll click on the body. I have that finished up. And I also had the eyes. So actually I should actually turn these pieces on whenever I have the skull selected. That way I can actually paint some values on there. And turn on the eyes for this one. I had the dirt done, the base, and then also this guy here. So then in my subtool stack, I've got this selected, and now I can kind of start comparing these values to some of the other stuff around it. One thing I should probably do is take a different material and fill it with a different material. So if I put it on matte cap white, let's see that one. I'm just trying to find something that's got doesn't have a whole lot of specularity to it. This chalk, I know that does, but it just kind of really flattens things out. So I could put it on matte cap white. This pretty much doesn't have much going on specularity wise, and that's kind of what I want for this thing. Let's put it back on the skin shade 4. I do kind of like the look of that. So maybe that's okay for the bone of this character. So I could put it on M for material, and then I could say color and say fill object, and now that's going to be filled with that, and I won't have to worry if I change materials for anything else, then that material is going to stay for that particular piece. So I could just kind of zoom out a little bit. Actually, I do have some camera views saved, and I could show you that real quick. So under Document, under ZapLink Properties, you can actually store a camera view. Like say if I want to store this view that we're looking at and say Custom, I can click this Custom 1 button, and we can actually get back to that view anytime we want. So I could push it to the side and save this as my Custom 2, and if I want to get back to that Custom 1, I just click it, and it's going to recall that camera view for me. And then you can save these views off. You can do the same thing with front, back, left, and right, top and bottom. So I actually have some views that I've made. So I can say load views, and this is actually up here under ZapLink views. I made a folder for that. I can hit open for that, and it should populate these with different. I used a front and a back, like this, and then I use this Custom 1 and Custom 2. So I'll just hit this Custom 1 and just take a look at this, see how it renders. So I'll do BPR, hit Shift R. I thought it'd be good to let you know that when we're using Spotlight, it is possible to save a Spotlight session out. So after you've got all your images loaded up, like what we looked at earlier inside the video, it's possible to go here into the Texture tab, and at the very top there is a Save Spotlight. So you can go ahead and click that, and you can save out the Spotlight information for this. And then if you want, at another time, you can actually load up that session later. So you can say load Spotlight. And it's actually going to recall the different images that you've saved together in this Spotlight session. So like you can see here for these skulls and bones that I'm actually painting on, I might want to use the same texture set at a later time on some other asset, and I can just recall this information up and how Spotlight work and not have to go through this whole process of pulling in all the images and stuff like that. So that's basically going to conclude everything I wanted to show for painting this thing. I think I do want to work on this a little bit more, so I'm going to take the video and I'm going to put it into a time-lapse mode, so then that way you can just kind of see quickly the additional steps that I'm going to go through and trying to finish this up. But I'm getting pretty happy with it, but just want to make a few more tweaks to it. So again, the video is going to go into this time-lapse mode, and we'll take a look and see what things look like at the end.